Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of Talking Point. My name is Faraz Patel. Would like to thank you for joining us on Hilaal TV channel 347 on DSTV. Of course, this is May the 1st, and we are, 4 weeks away from a hotly contested elections that will take place. And of course, we have seen so many new political parties coming to the frame. Last week, we had the UDM, a party that has been there for over 2 decades. Now, Rise Mzansi is a party that has been around for just over 1 year. You've seen their posters across many of the streets in Gauteng and nationally, of course, and it is a party that will be contesting both nationally and provincially. So today, my guest is someone who's going to be contesting for the hotly contested Gauteng province. It's none other than Vuyiswa Ramokgopa. Vuyiswa, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV.
Good evening, Faraz, and salam alaikum to all the viewers.
Wa alaikum salam. No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. We will be touching on Gauteng later on this episode, but I want to talk about the manifesto of Rise Mzansi. Of course, it was dubbed the People's Manifesto. It was launched at the start of the year. 1994 is our 2024.
Yes.
Many political parties have used that slogan, but from a Rise Mzansi perspective, why is 1994 our 2024?
Thank you for that question. And I mean, I think it's well established that Rise Mzansi actually originated that slogan. 2024 is our 1994. Yes. And it really encompassed the feeling that we had and that we sensed in the country that this is a real pivotal moment for us. 1994 was a moment of great shift, of great change, but more importantly, it was a time when South Africans came together around a common vision, and that common vision was to remove the apartheid government and to vote in a democratic government, obviously led by the ANC at that point. And it was a display of our power, and really what the people's power can do when we come together around a common vision. And we believe that 2024 presents a similar opportunity. We have seen for the last 30 years, as our country has progressively, been falling behind, and I compare to other developing countries that are similar to ours. And it hasn't been necessarily the whole time. It's not all bad stories. Of course, we know that. People like myself exist, and we are products of this democratic dispensation. However, that is not the lived reality for millions and millions of South Africans, and for the 12 million South Africans right now that are unemployed, many of whom are hungry and do not even have a single meal a day. Many are people who have been sitting and waiting on housing RDP lists since 1996 and houses that they were promised. Many of them have even died waiting on those lists. So my point is, we cannot judge. We have to be honest about the fact that particularly in the last 15 years, all indicators point to the fact that South Africa is going in the wrong direction. And that is a function of leadership, it's a function of political decisions, and all of that has kicked out the social ills, the corruption, the crime, and everything else that we complain about as a country.
Vuyiswa, within the manifesto of Rise Mzansi, your leader, Songezo Zibi, said, bringing back hope in a time of hopelessness. You, of course, grew up, you're a product of the Gauteng province, and we'll touch on that later, but the Gauteng province is a province that has seen so much of inequality, over the last 30 years, and post that, what we saw the remnants of the apartheid government. How does this manifesto speak to bringing back that hope, given that the country right now is in a really pivotal moment of where we are in terms of making sure that we head in that right direction?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are obviously a number of macro issues that we touch on and speak to in great detail. And our manifesto, as you pointed out, is called the People's Manifesto. So it came about as a byproduct of thousands of conversations, face-to-face interactions that we had with residents and citizens of this country from all walks of life. Some people who were lower income people, and also your business communities and different subsectors and different segments in our society. And we feel it is the broadest, and most representative document that we could have come up with. And the issues and challenges that people raise although we can talk about unemployment, and we do, we talk
Yes.
about unemployment as a core issue that that needs to be addressed. But unemployment doesn't happen in a vacuum. It has to happen in a context of economic growth. It can only happen in a context of economic growth. Our economy is not growing. So we have sort of spelt out our vision in terms of what are the ingredients to a growing economy. The ingredients to a growing economy and the ingredients to having an investment-friendly environment. People don't want to invest in municipalities that are dysfunctional. People cannot invest in a place that is crime-ridden and where they fear for their safety. People cannot invest in a place where the local skills base is not able to meet the actual demands of that company. People cannot invest, obviously, where there are high levels of corruption. So these are some of the ways in which we tackle the issue of employment, without just making empty promises. But I would say one of the core differentiating factors that we talk about in our manifesto is one of leadership and governance.
Yes.
Part of what we are facing right now, and you touch on it when you speak about hopelessness, is that not only have people lost trust in the governing party, they've lost trust in the system,
Yes.
in all political parties, in the political establishment as a whole. You hear people talking about wanting to throw out the constitution. You hear about people calling for electoral reform and wanting to elect directly. That is a testament to people who are crying out and saying, we want accountability from politicians. We want politicians to account to us as the people and not just to themselves and their political parties. And that's what we've seen over the last few years. We now have a politics that is a politics of the politicians, by the politicians, and only serving the politicians. And us as the citizens are left to sit and watch, and we only get called upon every 5 years to be told empty promises. And so we have to put a stop to that. So we have made some bold proposals around how we need to review the institutions of governance. We need electoral reform. And we are calling for an open list, hybrid constituency-based system where you still have proportional representation, you still have parties, but every representative within a party must be nominated and elected directly by members of the public. So that when I go to Parliament, there must be people who put me there, not just my party.
Yes.
And I must be required to go back to those people and account to them and say, what have I done with the mandate that you've given me? And if I don't serve that constituency, I should be able to escalate that to the party and call for that person to be recalled. This is how we start having a higher level of participation in our politics. And there are a number of other interventions, but we think very much the system that allows a level of impunity from politicians is why they've also just run amok and have been able to operate with such impunity.
Vuyiswa, Rise Mzansi is one of the new parties that will be contesting with us provincially and nationally. There's many other new parties that are going to be coming to the frame, and they all speak of their manifestos and, of course, their aims and ambitions should they come into power. What sets Rise Mzansi from maybe a Shiluva or a Build One South Africa or an MK party or Allied Movement for Change that are coming in, as many others, I've just named 4. What makes them? What makes Rise Mzansi different to them and even the old establishment?
Sure, I think as a starting point, Rise Mzansi, and particularly our national leader and myself as the national chairperson, are not breakaways of any other political party. We did not fight with another political party or have a clash of egos and then decide to go open our own shop. Rise Mzansi was genuinely formed out of a collective of ordinary citizens who felt that we identified a leadership vacuum in our political establishment. And unfortunately, a failed politician here cannot put on a different T-shirt and go there, and we suddenly deem them to be a successful politician. That's not how it works. The people have told us that they are tired, actually, of this crop of politicians, that many of whom have never, and I'm not speaking to necessarily the people you've named, I'm just saying many politicians, do not even have real world work experience. They are not even able to articulate a vision for this country because they have no feel for what ordinary people are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And so people are saying, we're tired of lying, thieving politicians. Put some competent people in those seats. And Rise Mzansi is a collective of citizens who come from a number of different walks of life, from civil society, from business, from academia. Songezo Zibi, our national leader, was, of course, editor of Business Day. He's worked in the corporate space, etc. Myself, I've worked in the NPO space, in advocacy and lobbying for transformation. I've also run my own businesses in the property sector and others, And I think it's the quality and caliber of our leadership collective that's very important. And I use the term collective because I think another key differentiating factor is that we are not a one-man personality project. Songezo Zibi is an inspiring visionary leader. But what I can comfortably and confidently say is if he was not here today, Rise Mzansi would very much continue to exist and would persist and continue to execute its mandate because we have built ourselves in such a way that we have depth and breadth of leadership across the full spectrum of our organization. We have 25 national leaders, 9 of whom are leading the provinces, all of whom are people of the highest ethics, integrity, and experience and quality. And we believe that if we want to resolve the challenges of this country, we have to start by holding ourselves to a higher standard of leadership. It starts there. We need the new leaders, and it's only when you put the right driver in the seat that you can actually imagine getting to your destination.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, the Rise Mzansi National Chairperson and Gauteng Premier candidate. We're going to be discussing challenges within the country and what more needs to be done in order to make sure that the basic services and the basic institutions are running the way we want as citizens. Do stay tuned to Talking Point. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm in conversation with Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, the Rise Mzansi National Chairperson and Gauteng Premier candidate. Vuyiswa, both you and I, of course, are born in the era of the 80s. We saw the flourishing of a democracy. We had the aura, we had the euphoria of Madiba magic. We then, of course, saw the darker side of our leadership during the Polokwane conference, which, of course, really saw that drop in how we as South Africans wanted our country to run. And we saw President Cyril Ramaphosa coming with a renewed hope, hasn't really materialized at this moment. What has gone wrong in this country? And why is it that us as the citizens have had to sit back, bear the brunt, and experience this vacuum or this lack of it, given just how bad the country has really taken a slippery slide?
Look, I think we can sit here and sort of pick apart the symptoms.
Yes.
So we all observe the symptoms around us. But ultimately, and sorry to sound like a stuck record, it has been a progressive deterioration in the quality of political leadership at the helm of this country. At the beginning of this democracy, like you said, some of us had the opportunity to see that.
Yes.
We had a crop of leaders who, although they may not have ever had any experience running governments before, because they came in 1994, many of them our age, late 30s, early 40s, zero experience having ever run any government before. But they were people of a certain quality, caliber, education standard, ethics, etc. And so even the professionals that were attracted into the public service knew that they could operate in an environment of competence and merit and all of those things. Now, when that starts to get eroded and all the competent professionals leave the public service for various reasons, because they're either being frustrated or compromised or being embroiled in corruption or having their reputations tarnished, because this is a fact, this is what happens. Competent people get hounded out of public service. They then go and make their life either in the private sector or in other spaces, and we lose as a country the best, and we lose the capacity to actually govern and run this country. So we are very clear that ours is a problem of political leadership. We have incredible people. We have many people who are still in the public sector, by the way, and I don't want to create the impression that anyone in the public sector is not competent.
Yeah, sure.
My issue is with the caliber and quality of political leadership, number one, but number two, the fact that there is now no longer a separation between the political layer and the public administration. And I want to use an example with the current sort of concern that people have around coalition governments.
Yes.
One of the main reasons that we face a potential issue with coalition governments is because there is not a delineation between the political and the public administration. When a new administration comes in, everybody who was employed gets fired, and this new political principle comes with their people. Boards of state-owned entities get changed, and I'm talking at all levels here. Boards of municipal entities get changed, and they get swapped out with the people that the politicians want. That is wrong. We need to ensure a clear separation between the administration and the political layer, which will enable us to navigate coalition politics and government in the way that our counterparts in Europe and other parts of the world do. The Netherlands could not form a government for 244 days. But no one even noticed. I don't think their currency even fluctuated.
Yes.
Why? Because they have a fully formed public service that was able to continue to run independently of the fact that the politicians were still squabbling and couldn't find themselves. And that's where we need to get to. So ours is very clear. We must recapacitate the state, and we must create an environment where the best in society see public service and see political leadership as an aspirational space. And they come and they give their skills to public service because it's in service of all of us and in service of all of our children and future generations. But to do that, we have to get out the shoddy crop of politicians we have now, and we need to, as citizens, aspire to a higher standard of leadership in politics and hold politicians to a much higher standard.
And that's what we're going to talk about in the next segment. You know, the slogan of Rise Mzansi, we need new leaders. Vuyiswa, today being Workers' Day, it was the same song and tale from many political parties with regards to how they're going to be dealing with the economy. 32.1% unemployment rate. Out of that 32.1%, many of them are youth. I heard Zwelinzima Vavi was the SAFTU Secretary General. He says 32.1% it's an exaggerated potential. It could be even more.
It's a lot more.
It's a lot more.
Yeah.
How do we solve this? How does Rise Mzansi, through its manifesto, solve this? Because this is a crisis. You drive past, 5 minutes from my house is the Department of Labor. You drive past there, the lines are long, the lines are full of young people. This has to change, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, the question of unemployment and the high and rising unemployment rate is a function of the fact that our economy is not growing. We cannot create jobs.
Below 1%.
Yes, we cannot create any sustainable, permanent jobs in a low or no growth environment, which is what we are currently in. So we need to throw everything in the kitchen sink at growing the economy. And that's why we lead as Rise Mzansi with a declaration that we are targeting 6% economic growth. That is the only way that we can that international economic models show us that if you're at least growing at 6% per annum, you have an opportunity to then double the size of your economy every 12 years, which enables you to progressively bring the unemployment rate down. And there's a formula to that. For every 1% of GDP growth that you attain, the multiplier is 1% to 0.9 employment growth. So what that would mean, and I'm using Gauteng as a context, right? So Gauteng, we currently have 5 million people who are employed, circa 2.5 million who are unemployed. If we are able to grow the economy of Gauteng by just 1%, we can create 1.1 million jobs, of permanent jobs. I'm not talking about government short-term work opportunities. I'm talking about permanent jobs off of the back of that 1% growth. And so we have to be having those conversations. So the question becomes, what are the ingredients to that growth? I'll give you another example. Eskom. The dysfunction of Eskom and Transnet, and we talk a lot about that in our manifesto, is a massive drag to the economy and the economic growth. In 2022, the load shedding that we experienced in 2022 alone cost us, again, as the clever economists calculated, it cost us 300,000 jobs. Eskom alone.
Yes.
Cost us.
And then throw in Transnet,
then you throw in Transnet, and then you throw in all kinds of things. And it completely, then you hear narratives around investment strikes. There's no investment strikes. Investment and capital goes where it can grow. Investors literally invest in war-torn countries. They invest in countries that are far less, functional than ours. But they do so because, one, there's policy certainty. There's a government that is essentially functioning, whatever you call that. And they can grow. And we are currently being surpassed by even our counterparts on the continent, the likes of Rwanda, the likes of Kenya, Zambia. They're sitting doing between 5 and 8% growth right now. And we are lagging behind. We have no excuse. I could give a number of other examples, the likes of Thailand. I mean,
Vietnam. Where the energy crisis themselves a couple of years ago.
Thailand, we basically started at exactly the same starting point about 20 years ago with similar-sized population sizes and similar-sized GDP. They have far surpassed us since then. So, and our head of policy loves to say, if we are going to be comparing where we are now, if we're constantly going to be comparing ourselves to apartheid, everything looks like progress. Of course, because we had very little to work with. Where the picture becomes a lot clearer is when you start comparing us to our counterparts globally. Countries and economies that are the same size as us, have a similar level of human capital. In fact, we are even better because we have a much bigger youth population, etc. So we're just not getting the basics right, and we're choking the system. So we've got to focus on getting Eskom and Transnet sorted out. We've got to get more low-cost risk capital into the system so that small businesses and entrepreneurs can actually access capital. We know what a big issue that is. You cannot grow any business which is responsible for employing people without capital. And so we need to make sure that there are enough institutions, the likes of the NEF, are painfully undercapitalized. Government actually does not fund them adequately. So they go and raise money now on the capital markets and in other places. They have to basically walk around with a begging bowl
I've got 2 minutes. I just have to get this question through. No, it's fine. Fighting the criminal justice system. We've seen, of course, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. The recommendations are there. The NPA and the Hawks, and last week I listened to Shamila Batoy, the NPA head, Advocate Shamila Batoy, who of course spoke at the Cape Town Press Club. There's a problem with funding. There's a problem with there's no real direction. That has to change because we've got politicians who are sitting on the State Capture Commission. They need to be prosecuted. They can't be prosecuted because the NPA has no money. That has to change, hasn't it? Because without that, the levels of impunity are going to continue to grow. No,
absolutely. So the NPA, of course, is also another key institution that's underfunded. The public protector, as we know, has been doing the heavy lifting for some time now, but they're not even a prosecutorial entity. And then, of course, you also just have, just the independence of these institutions. I'm of the mind that we actually should have an independent institution that is particularly focused on corruption and on police-related crimes. And I think we need to get serious about it and declare zero tolerance on corruption. This government is not serious about prosecuting corruption. If it were, you would see that in the budget.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Vuyiswa Ramokgopa. We're going to be touching on a slogan, or one of the slogans of Rise Mzansi: we need new leaders. What is the level of the governance crisis within South Africa right now, heading into the elections in 4 weeks' time? Do stay tuned to Talking Point. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm starting conversation with Vuyiswa Ramokgopa from Rise Mzansi. Vuyiswa, we need new leaders. Why do we need them? But why do we need competent leaders?
There's no shortcut to good leadership. And it doesn't matter what industry you're from, whether you're leading a church or an NGO or a company. Companies perform when they have competent, good CEOs and leaders. We currently don't. And that's why South Africa Inc. is failing. And when we talk about needing new leaders, it's, as I said, it's partly political leaders, but it's also about ensuring that we have a competent and capable state. Because it's not just about the politicians. It's about ensuring that every single MP, every seat is occupied by someone who is able and willing and going to do the job on our behalf. And I say this because that's where the most robust discussion happens in the legislatures, national and provincial. And those people are supposed to be representing us. But you and I, most of the time, don't even know who those people are. We don't know what their qualifications are. We don't know how they got to be there. And we don't know what agenda they're representing. So we need to be a lot more, we need to pay a lot more attention to that. And we need to ensure that we hold ourselves to a very high standard of leadership. It is the only way. If you look at other developing countries, like the so-called Asian tigers and miracle countries, there are two non-negotiables that all those countries have. One is a zero tolerance on corruption, because corruption kills any ambitions that a country has of developing itself. Rent seeking is unattractive to investors. The second thing, it must be a merit-based country. We understand that we come from a very challenged past, and not everybody's starting on an equal footing. But we must build a system, an education system, and otherwise, that enables people to rise up, to empower themselves, and to get to the highest echelons of society on the basis of merit, not because they know someone or because they are politically connected.
I want to go back to 2021. Vuyiswa, I remember the July unrest. Obviously, we had not just government officials or members of the ANC, we had from different political parties going to the affected areas. And I, I'm not an expert in body language or reading minds, but I just felt that there was a sense of not understanding what the people want on the ground.
Yeah.
That there's a lack of understanding, that there's a huge divide.
Yeah.
How important is that? Because that's your voter, that's your constituency.
No,
and if you're not speaking to that constituency, then what are you doing as a politician or somebody who serves the community?
Absolutely. I mean, something that we hear over and over again when we are on the ground, and we spend an inordinate amount of time in communities or in conversations with citizens. Yes, as part of this campaign, but it's also been a culture of Rise since we started, is that the reason people have no faith in the system is because they say, you guys just come every 5 years and then we never see you again. We need a democracy. We need to move towards a more participatory democracy where there is a constant two-way interface between the public and their representatives. Representatives must come and report back to their constituents, whether you are sitting in the national legislature or in local council or in the province. Somebody voted for you to be there. You must go and account to what you've done whilst you've been in office. And number two, citizens themselves need to also have much easier and direct interfaces with their representatives. So those platforms for engagement must exist, whether it's town halls, community meetings, etc. They should be happening on an ongoing basis. When pieces of legislation are being considered, they must happen. But we currently don't have that culture in South Africa. I think for myself, and I'll speak for myself, I had never attended a town hall, on anything until about 2 years ago when I suddenly got interested and made a point to go and find one. Even though I have a ward councillor, even though I'm very interested in politics. And so we must acknowledge also that democracy is a team sport, and every single one of us has a responsibility to ensure that that system works. If we leave it up to just the politicians, they will run rampant, and they will do what they want to do, and they will never account to us.
There's one unique thing about Rise Mzansi is that you've got a lot of youth leaders. I personally know a lot of individuals that have joined Rise Mzansi that are part of the party because they say it's a party that speaks to the youth. The manifesto speaks to the youth. How important is youth right now within the political system? Because when we talk politics, it's an old man's game. Oh, you have to be 40 plus to be joining politics. But the days are gone. Those days have disappeared. We see the 20-year-olds, we see the 30-year-olds coming in to the frame because they want to make that change. Is that a characteristic that Rise Mzansi will continue to embrace, given the fact that the youth are right now, I know it's a cliche, but they are the future of the country.
Sure.
But they're future of the country that needs to have a voice, don't they?
Absolutely. So, I mean, ironically, the majority of our population are classified as youth, or rather under 40. But we also have a very ageist society, culturally. Elderly people are highly respected and hold some significance and prominence in society. And that's not a bad thing. So when we call for more youth representation, it's not because we want to undermine the role and relevance of older people. They absolutely have a role to play. But we cannot keep young people out of the room and out of political conversations, because indeed, they are the biggest shareholders of the future of this country. And I say they because I myself am not even youth anymore. I talk to 20-year-olds. We're speaking a very different language already. And so we also need to be comfortable with the fact that there will always be this generational shift. I think what we've succeeded in doing at Rise Mzansi is having a constant intergenerational mix, both at our national leadership collective level. Our youngest member of the NLC is 21, also one of the youngest people on our list. And the oldest is 70 years old. And what that allows us to do is to have a good cross-section of experience and wisdom, but also freshness of ideas and robustness of engagement. And that is what makes for good quality political debate and discourse and policy making, because policies cannot just also be for the youth. Policies must speak to all of us. And so even myself as a so-called middle-aged kind of person, I use that term very loosely. I look to young people for advice. I look to elderly people for advice. And I think policy making must encompass that.
Vuyiswa, of course, Hilaal TV being a Islamically oriented channel, we have, of course, a variety of diverse backgrounds that are watching us, not just Muslim, but non-Muslim. But if you are Rise Mzansi speaking to the Muslim vote, and I know there's a lot of Muslim individuals that are part of Rise Mzansi, of course, one of them being Irfan Mangera, who comes from quite a rich background of activism. He's just one of the many that, of course, part of Rise Mzansi. If you're now speaking to the Muslim vote, if you're now speaking to the Muslim constituency, and I do know we make up, a minority of the Republic of South Africa, but there's been various contributions, from the Muslim community, be it through NGOs or religion.
Absolutely.
Your message to them before we go to the break, as to why Rise Mzansi should be their party of choice.
So I think that one thing that we have abandoned, sadly, because of the poor leadership in this country, one thing we've abandoned is the vision of a truly non-racial, non-sexist, non-discriminatory society. Rise Mzansi fundamentally believes that every voice, every constituency, anybody from any religious background, from any racial background, has a seat at the table. We do not believe in this idea that you need Muslim parties for Muslim people, women's parties for women's people, youth parties for youth people. We are one country, we are all South Africans, and what we need to be doing is collectively bringing our heads together to forge a future that every single one of us can have a part of and every single one of us can enjoy. And I think that is the miracle that was South Africa in 1994. That we managed to transcend our individual sort of identity, strongholds that the apartheid government tried so hard to force us into, even using things like the Group Areas Act. We rejected that and we said, we will not be bound by your idea of who we should be. We know who we are. We are South Africans and we are going to fight for a country for all. And Rise Mzansi is fighting for a country for all of us. After the break, I wrap up my conversation with Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, but we're going to be focusing
on what's going to be her bread and butter that's challenging for the premier position of the Gauteng province. That's going to be a hotly contested one. We speak about that after the break. Do stay tuned to Talking Point. Welcome back to Talking Point. Now, the Gauteng province, the financial hub of South Africa and one of the financial hubs on the continent of Africa. Vuyiswa Ramokgopa is going to be challenging for the premier position of that province. Vuyiswa, Gauteng, you are just like myself, sorry. I was born and bred in the province. Of course, I come from the east. You give us a background of where you come from, of course, from that part of Gauteng. But this is a province that is special to, I think, both you and I, and to so many millions of people here, because it's the hotbed of the South African economy. But it's a province that has really deteriorated in terms of service delivery, in terms of, the energy issues, in terms of so much more.
Sure.
How does Vuyiswa Ramokgopa solve the problems within Gauteng?
Yeah, so I'm a third generation Gauteng native. I was born here. My parents, my grandparents were also born here. And I in particular was born in Hillbrow in the mid-'80s, which, it's a vastly different place now than what it was then. At that time, as a young child, you could walk across the street and go play in the park, and your parents wouldn't worry about where you were. I was actually talking to my mother the other day. She was reminiscing about the good old days of how they used to get on the train at Braamfontein station, and they would then go to Fordsburg. I think there was a movie house or something there.
Avalon Cinema.
Yes, that they used to go to. And, she was she was reminiscing about those times in the 70s and how that was. And I think we have watched the gradual disintegration of Gauteng before our eyes over the last 30 years. It obviously started with the capital flight in the CBD. In the early 90s, but progressively, because of the failures of governance, particularly local municipalities, we have seen that now completely falling apart. Service delivery issues like you've raised, even the basics like just water provision and having consistent water supply have become a luxury. I don't even want to talk about electricity. That is a known issue to all. So 2 weeks ago, we launched the Gauteng plan. And it's called Tsuga Gauteng.
Yes,
Tsuga means wake up, rise up, get up. It's about revitalizing Gauteng and restoring it to its former glory. And we see really 5 key pillars that we want to focus on. And we've termed them the 5 C's. The first one is really about connecting people. And it's about connecting people to each other and also connecting them to work opportunities. Part of the reason we have this sticky unemployment issue is because even the cost of looking for a job is too high in this city. Most people spend about 80 Rand a day or 40% of their income on transport. We don't have a functional public transport system. And if we can restore, so our priority is to restore rail and bus transport and make that the public transport of choice so that people can be spending 20 Rand a day. And that's, alike to what they spend in other parts of the world, developing countries and the like. It's also about data connectivity. We're living in a fast-moving technological world. We need to invest in free Wi-Fi and data availability and hotspots all over the city, all over the province, for everyone. And so looking at schools, looking at community centers, and all areas where people convene, we must make sure that data is publicly available, because people can literally run businesses from their phones as long as they've got data. So that's number one. And all of those speak to the cost of living. Data is a huge item. Food is a huge item. Transport is a huge item. Housing is a massive item. So we also talk about, the legacy of apartheid spatial planning and how in 30 years we have been unable to undo that legacy of apartheid spatial planning. Colored people are still living in colored areas. Black people are still living in black townships, and so on and so forth. A few of us in the middle class have made our way out, and we're playing house in the suburbs. But what we should be doing is actually creating a more just cities and provinces where we have mixed income, mixed use housing in all of the economically viable areas. So if you look at Sandton, if you look at your Midrands, your fourways, you should be able to have a situation where an employer and their domestic employee can live 10 minutes away from each other, not where the domestic employee has to travel 40 minutes away or 2 hours away to get home. And failing which, there must be public transport that is cheap and available for them. So that's the one. Cleaning. As we've spoken about cleaning out government. Massive corruption issue. I don't need to go into it, but we have to take a zero tolerance approach to corruption and clean out corrupt elements in government. That will also, it also speaks to physical cleaning. Our province is a mess. It is the capital of crime and grime, okay? So we have to start with fostering a culture of cleanliness. And sometimes it's not just about service delivery, it's also about public awareness. It's about changing the culture of cleanliness in our province. And you can do that through running targeted communication campaigns and ensuring that we're all aligned and there's a vision around that. Care is the third aspect. And there we talk about restoring community facilities such as recreation centers to communities. We need to invest in childcare facilities in all communities so that parents and mothers in particular are able to leave their children comfortably and go to work. Because women currently now have to choose between should I go to work and earn a pittance and leave my child alone with a stranger, potentially susceptible to all kinds of other things, or do I stay at home and look after a child? So we must have childcare facilities. And we must also restore the state of Gauteng healthcare, which we know is in shambles. And the last two, which I think are very important, is creating is the fourth pillar, and that talks about job creating and creating an economy that is growing and creating an economy that works for all. And obviously the viewers can read about that in more detail. Yes. But we're estimating that if we put a few key things in place, such as infrastructure development, crime and safety measures, etc., we can conservatively estimate that we can enable the creation of 600,000 jobs over a period of 5 years. And that's a conservative estimate. And so then that brings me to the last one, which is really about cooperation. Our constitution calls for a system of cooperative governance between the different spheres of government. As the province, we have a responsibility to ensure that the municipalities are functional, that they are coordinating with each other, and that the development programs, be it a spatial development program or otherwise, are being rolled out, accordingly in the 11 municipalities of Gauteng. So as the premier of this province, my particular role is to ensure that that happens and that there is a good enough interface and that we have a mature enough political principal who is able to carry those types of conversations and coordinate a number of different stakeholders. Because here's the last thing I want to say. We are never going back to single-party majority governance in South Africa. We are at a point now where our democracy has matured. We are free, actually. This is wonderful. We are now entering our maturing, robust democracy, which is functioning in the way that those who designed our constitution intended for it to design. We are a multi-party democracy wherein we have a number of different parties that are able to contest and represent minority interests, and everybody is protected. What we need to be able to do is have the types of leaders that can work collaboratively and constructively with other leaders. So we need a change of the culture of politics. We need a change of the types of leaders that we elect, and we need to recognize where we are. We need to be able to cooperate up and down with the different spheres of government and also across with our colleagues and the various people in different political parties. And we're very open to doing that, so much so we have committed to it as one of our 5 pillars.
Vuyiswa, of course you come from the property sector. I know you're still, involved in it in a way, and spatial development is something that you're quite passionate about. We were talking about it off air. How do we address that? You were speaking about it earlier on, because the legacy of apartheid still has continued. If we look at Fordsburg and Lenasia, still dominated by the Indians. You've got the Sowetos of this world. You've got the Eldorado parks, which was one for colored, one for black African. And you've just mentioned that to get them into the cities, this is one of the plans, but it's going to disrupt private property owners who are not going to be satisfied with this plan. How do you deal with it? How do you challenge, assisting the residents of Gauteng, but also trying to make sure that there's not an upsetting of the private property owners? Is there a balance, or is one of the two going to be affected by the decisions that are going to be made?
Well, what I want to start by saying is that it shouldn't cause an upset. I mean, this is how most modern cities work. You have mixed income living, mixed income and mixed use development in all major cities. In fact, in some cities like New York, you even have things like rent-controlled buildings where there's a physical cap on how much the rent can be to enable lower income people to live in and amongst, in more affluent suburbs. So this is about intentionally designing an integrated and non-racial society. And to do that, we have the resources available. In the city of Johannesburg, for example, during the term of one of the previous mayors, I think the city expropriated about 142 buildings that were derelict and whose owners could not be found. And unfortunately, because of corruption and the change of government, and so there was no continuity, we haven't been able to then convert those into properly functional buildings. They were then taken over and hijacked by slumlords. But I'm saying in a functional government, those very buildings that were legally expropriated by the state, which is very possible and already sits in our legislation as something they're able to do, should then have been used to redevelop them into mixed income, multi-use properties and developments that we could attract investment to, we could have commercial activity, and also have high quality, low cost, affordable housing. That's one aspect. But we have many such. If you look at Sandton, for example, the vacancy rate of office blocks in Sandton is sitting at about 26%. That means 26% of buildings that are there are sitting empty. Well, GLA, so it's not really the whole building, but you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So my point is, could we not have a conversation with the private sectors or private owners to say, let's put a scheme together whereby some of those buildings get taken over by government through the appropriate means, and we actually repurpose them for high density urban development. And there's already that type of development happening, and the private sector is leading it already. You see such in Sunning Hill already, some of these buildings coming up already, but we can fast track that. We can ride the wave that's already happening and attract this development investment that's looking for opportunities like this. So I'm saying what it needs, though, is leaders who can think and operate in these complex environments. And fundamentally, we need to be able to bridge the trust gap between the private sector and the public sector so that we can work collaboratively towards improving our province and improving our cities. The private sector, I engage with them all the time. Yes. They have certain concerns that they need addressed. They cannot function in dysfunctional municipalities. It is the job of government to get the municipality to function. So we need to do our part, and then we need to be able to rally around other stakeholders to come and do their part so that we can return this province to being thriving again. And we just want the best for this province. And
definitely. I think all of us would like that.
We all want the best. So let's bring the best leaders to the table. Let's vote for change. Let's vote for leaders who actually represent progress, who represent the future, and who are willing to bring other competent, capable people to the table to get things done.
Vuyiswa, I just have to fit in a question. We're out of time, but I need to fit in this one quickly. Of course, Rise Mzansi is a newly formed party. You're coming up against the big three, the DA, the EFF, the ANC. There's, of course, Action SA in the mix. Should, of course, Rise Mzansi get a sort of a percentage, whether it's the one seat within the legislature, and of course be occupied by yourself. How do you strike the balance between wanting to have that seat but giving service delivery to the people? Can they coexist? How does it work from your part in it? I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer that question. Yeah.
So, quick one. There's obviously a difference between being in the executive and being in the legislature. So, with one seat, which it would not be the case, but hypothetically.
Hypothetically speaking, yes,
and you see it in Parliament, there are a number of parties that have 2 seats. And the purpose then is that you use your seat to hold the executive accountable, to ask the right questions, to make sure that they are doing what they say they do, and to obviously represent your constituency that has placed you there. And that work doesn't stop. The gold standard, and I think what everybody ideally would like to have, is executive power to be able to actually execute on the mandate, but that's not always the case. However, Again, our system is designed in that way. You have those in the executive, they cannot also be left to run amok. Those who are in the legislature are there to ask the right questions, hold them accountable, champion certain issues. In the national legislature, you can even bring forward private members' bills and put forward specific legislation that you want to see being tabled. Many of our biggest national scandals have been brought to light by minority parties and have become national issues because of that. So that only works, again, if you have the people occupying those seats able to ask the right questions and champion the issues and sit across the table from the CEO of any of the state entities or even private entities and be willing to ask the right questions. And I think whether we have 1 seat, 10 seats or 20 seats, we are working towards fundamentally renewing the state of leadership in our country, and we will commit to that no matter how many seats we have.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV, and all the best ahead of your contestation for the Gauteng Premier.
Thank you so much.
We wish you all the best, and we hope to speak to you soon, definitely.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
That's Vuyiswa Ramokgopa, the Rise Mzansi National Chairperson, and of course the Premier for the Premier candidate for the Gauteng Province. That's all we have for you here from Talking Point, from myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.